Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, so today we'll start off with the keynote for this summer school, which we were hoping to have yesterday, but due to scheduling issues, we're having today. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Anurag Kumar, who's the director of IISc and also professor at ECE, to give the keynote talk. And Professor Kumar is here not just to inaugurate this event, but because he's a scientist whose research is intrinsically linked to Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems. And he's going to be talking about his research and some of the research ideas around IoT and CPS. So just to give a brief introduction of his sort of bio, so Professor Kumar, he got his BTech from IIT Kanpur and a PhD from Cornell in electrical engineering. And he was with Bell Labs in the US for 6 years before he joined IISc in 1988. And since then, he's been the chair of the ECE department, the divisional chair of the EE division, and currently the director of IISc. He was instrumental in getting ERNet set up, which a couple of decades back was one of the first research networks, large-scale research networks within India. And his area of research is on communication networking, modeling, analysis, control, and optimization of communication networks and distributed systems. And his recent research has focused primarily on wireless networking. So some of the tutorial you had yesterday evening and more that you'll be having today goes into some of the hands-on aspects of these issues. And you'll hear some of the big problems this morning. He's a fellow of the IEEE, the Indian National Academy of Science, and INAE, and several others, right? And he received the IISc Alumni Award for Excellence in Engineering Research in 2008, and he's been awarded the DST JC Bose National Fellowship from 2011 to 2016. And with this, I invite Professor Kumar to take the stage. Right.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. Can you all hear me at the back? Okay. I'm also honored that you postponed the keynote by one day to accommodate my engagement yesterday. So I'll be using throughout the acronym CPS, Cyber Physical Systems, quite a mouthful to say again and again. And I guess I'm bringing together two very popular acronyms that everybody wants to learn about and work in, CPS and IoT together in this talk. The focus here is going to be, in particular, what are the issues if you do inference and control over resource challenge wireless networks, which basically are the research issues in CPS over IoT. Normally when I give a technical talk, I only say myself as a professor. Director is an administrative term. The objective of this presentation is to present to you some engineering challenges in CPS over IoT through some examples. The examples are going to be primarily based on our own research. I'll give a sprinkling of other research that is there in the area, but since I'm a bit behind on my reading, given last 2 years of administrative work, I'll focus on my own research, and then also the papers which I'll refer to you will have in them references which will refer you to other work in the area. This is going to be organized into 3 or 4 broad topics. How much time do I have, Yogesh? Till about 10:30? Okay. I'll first talk about the evolution of CPS. When did CPS begin? What CPS was, why CPS is important today. Then I'll tell you about IoT networks, in what way IoT and CPS are related. Then I'll talk about 2 broad areas. IoT networks, what sort of limitations they bring, and how do you design them. Okay, yesterday you heard about very specific, device level programming, programming level understanding of IoT. Today we'll give you a more systems level understanding of IoT. And then what are the issues if you're going to run a CPS? So in fact, I've already let the cat out of the bag. The whole new thing here is CPS over IoT. What are the new issues which arise in CPS systems when you run CPS over IoT? The computing, control, and inference over wireless networks is the issue that I'm going to spend the second half of the talk on. And then I'll talk about several challenges in a couple of slides which I don't work on, which are very important, perhaps more important now, going forward when IoT is going to become a reality, hopefully, in the next several years. Let's step back a bit. Of course, you all understand the term CPS. The cyber comes from computing, and the P, the physical, comes from anything in the physical world, whether it is controlling the environment in this room, the lighting in this room, traffic on our roads, pollution on the roads, and so on and so forth. So any physical domain being controlled by a computer. So you'll wonder what's new about that. Even in the 1970s, you had this system. This was the Bosch electronic power petrol injection system. If you look at it closely, this is taken from the web. You'll find that there's one control computer. Attached to it are various sensors directly attached. So there is a terminal, there is a connector in the computer box itself, to which the manifold pressure, the mixture in the engine, everything is coming into that directly into the control computer. And the computer is making decisions about the mixture of the fuel and the petrol and the air, and when the engine should fire, and so on and so forth. So everything is connected to the control computer, the sensors and the actuators. So this is the model that you had in the 1970s in a typical CPS system. Computing, sensing, and actuation were tightly coupled. Okay, this is a physical domain in which you have sensors and actuators. The physical domain is an engine, sensors and actuators. With the computer to which directly you attach all the sensors and actuators. Okay. Then came the 1980s. People realized that as you want to connect more and more systems in the car, the windows, the power windows, the wipers, and everything in the car is to be connected to a control computer, you have the whole mess of wires running all over the car. In fact, I was told that some years back, the harness in the car began to weigh so much that they had to begin to worry about it. Okay, and these harnesses have to be very, robust, so they have to have a lot of insulation and heavy wires and so on and so forth. So then, of course, this was the era of the evolution of LANs, and then they evolved something called the CAN bus. So the CAN bus was a Bosch invention, and there was something called the field bus, which was, I guess, more non-proprietary. And then you can see what's happening here. You're connecting up all these sensors and actuators to the computing by means of a shared medium bus. This is called the CAN bus. So what happened then? Instead of having what I told you earlier, inference and control in a physical domain by sensing, actuation, and computing over, tightly coupled, you now have them over a high-performance communication network. So this is the model that evolves now. You have computing, actuation, and sensing over TCP/IP, where the TCP/IP is running on a high-performance network. Okay. But the thing is that because this is a high-performance network, it implies that you can still think of separation between the control and inference and the network itself. If it works fast enough, delays are very small, throughput is very high, I don't care about the network being there. So I can still design that inference and control system without caring about the network. Of course, there are issues which all networking people know. If you push it too hard, then there will be congestion, and then there will be increase in delays. So you basically operate it at a reasonable throughput. But given that there is enough juice in the system, you can still forget about the network when designing the computing, activation, and sensing. Essentially, there was nothing new here if a network was well designed. Okay. But then let's look at the CPS 2020. Let's take an example. This is an example of driver support by wireless tire sensors. This is Pirelli's little thing called the Cyber Tire sensor. This sits inside, this is Pirelli's tire, sits inside the tire, in a tubeless tire. It is stuck to the wall of the tire inside. Today what this thing is doing is something very simple. It's only telling you what the tire pressure and perhaps alerting you of an imminent failure in the tire. This is all it's doing today. But what's the vision of this? It's already happening, people are trying it out. Maybe it's already on the road, I do not know. So what does the tire sensor do? What does this device have in it? it has in it a 3-axis accelerometer. Okay? It has temperature, pressure. It can measure temperature, pressure, where a number of times dial has revolved. It also has a wireless communicator which can talk to the onboard computer. Clearly, there can be no wires because it's rotating with the wheel. So what's the vision for this? First of all, it can give you driver decision support. So this is the inference part, right? I'm talking about inference and control. This is the inference part. It can tell you that the road is icy or wet or it's got a good grip, so the driver can be cautious when driving. But there's more that it can do. It can actually interact with a control computer. So now you have actuators. The actuators is the engine. The wheel is actually where the rubber hits the road. And then there's a control computer. So you have sensing, control and computing. So you can actually have the software adjust the speed and braking to optimize performance and prevent skidding. So the driver can actually be helped by the system, by a control system running in the system. And what's more, because this is spinning, there's a lot of motion, you can extract energy from the spinning, from the mechanical motion. So you can have its battery always charged up. So there's no need for a battery replacement. So this is energy harvesting. So ideally will never require a battery change. Maybe when the tire goes, the sensor goes with it. Okay? So there are huge possibilities here. But the challenge, of course, is to design reliable and robust decision support and control in this environment. Okay? Clearly, you do not want to give this to a driver and let him trust it unless you really design it well. You could have the system going haywire and there being an accident. Okay? So that's the vision. So the vision is CPS over embedded wireless network sensors and actuators. So this is a little fragment of what I'm talking about. There's a physical domain in which you have sensor modes. By the way, the word mode was, I think you must have heard about it yesterday. It means a speck of dust. The term came out of UC Berkeley Sensit project. So sensor mode, then you have actuator mode. And so these are lying in the physical domain. For example, that sensor in the tire and whatever actuators one may have in the body of the car. And then you have these relays. This is all wireless. One thing you must remember is that every device here is also a wireless relay. You can have sensors as relays, actuators as relays. You may have to put additional relays to communicate between the actuators and sensors back to the infrastructure. And then typically you may have a wireless base station. This is a wireless base station from where there may be a wireless link to the infrastructure. So it could be a two-layer network, sort of a resource challenged wireless, a somewhat better wireless, and then you have the wireline local infrastructure. There would be analytics and control, which you heard yesterday, possibly in the cloud and application dashboard. So you can imagine this being the car, you can imagine this being a smart city, you can imagine this being a smart water system, whatever. Also, in addition, the sensors and actuators could be mobile. For example, in the car, the sensor is mobile. You could have people carrying around sensors, you could have garbage trucks carrying sensors, you could have actuators and so on and so forth, which could also be mobile, as in the car. And another important thing is that you have multi-hop networking. Typically, you cannot expect that between the sensor and actuator and the infrastructure there's only one hop because the wireless being a highly uncontrollable communication medium. Okay? And so you would have wireless via relays. This is a relay, and protocol gateway. This is a protocol gateway. It may be protocol gateway between Ethernet and something which I'll come to a bit later, and whatever is happening here, or between two different wireless protocols. Okay, it could be Wi-Fi on one side and something else on the other side. Okay, so this is a protocol gateway as well as being a base station. So this is a picture probably you've seen before. It's a popular picture which came out of this book by Shelby and Borman. Around this time was when the term IoT also came, by the way. This was somebody in the UK in his PhD or master's work. He evolved the term IoT, Internet of Things. Let's look at some numbers here. I'll start with the middle ring. The middle ring is what is the fringe internet. The fringe internet is where the internet comes to you in your home or in your office. Given that there are about 6-7 billion people, roughly you can expect there are about 1 billion such devices by which people connect to the internet. Roughly one device per home or per office. So about a billion devices. And there are about 1 million nodes in the core internet. There's a factor of 1,000 right there. And the expectation is there would be about 1 trillion nodes in the Internet of Things, roughly 1,000 devices per person. Of course, that will be many years in the future. People are talking about a few dozens or maybe 50 or so devices in the years to come. That's the first view, about a factor of 1,000 between the core internet, the fringe internet, and the IoT. There's another scaling here. The core internet runs at 100 Gbps. Today you can carry 100 Gbps on an optical fiber light path. The fringe internet is 100 Mbps. For example, your Wi-Fi is running at those speeds. Today in 5G and perhaps even 4G, you're getting such speeds, 100 Mbps. At least that's the link rate. The rate you get on the phone would be very small. Wi-Fi works at these rates. But then look at the Internet of Things link rates. They're 100 kilobits per second. Again, a factor of 1,000 between here and between here and here. So you're looking at very low bit rates in this wireless network, which is going to connect sensors to the infrastructure. 100 Mbps, 100 kilobits per second. These were the speeds that we were getting when we began ERNet in the 1980s, late 1980s. So basically what you see here is you have a resource-rich core for IoT and a resource-challenged fringe for IoT. Okay, let's see in what senses it is resource-rich and resource-challenged. First of all, I talked about the basic physical link rates. The routers in the internet would have dual power supplies, huge amounts of memory, huge amounts of storage, very powerful processors. The devices in the Internet of Things would have 100 kilobits per second bit rate, batteries that may fail while they're working. They'll depend upon energy harvesting. Trickles of power are coming in, and they'll have maybe 100 kilobytes of storage. They'll be working at a few megahertz of bit rate, and so on and so forth. So, and there will be also, you'll see a little bit later, very poor quality wireless links. So resource challenged, resource rich. So that's sort of a high level view of the Internet of Things. So IoT is best viewed as a platform for CPS. People often confuse IoT with many things. Today, the word IT has become IoT, essentially. Anything that's IT is now today, put an O in between, it's IoT. Whether you are making a smarter ATM or you're building a smart city, it's all IoT today. In a very similar sense that the internet is the platform for the World Wide Web, you can think of IoT as the platform for CPS. So this is the abstraction that we'll be thinking about in the next few slides. There's a system to be controlled and observed. This is the physical domain, the physical part of CPS, in which there are sensors and actuators. And there's a control computer, which is doing the inferencing and the control. And in between, there's a packet network. If this was a part of this, there's no issue. If the control computer was a part of the sensing and actuation system, there's nothing to be done. You're back in the 70s. The difficulty is when you are going to separate them out. And even though I'm showing this as one box, this box really is going to be distributed. You will have these sensors all over the place. You're controlling systems, not just a car engine. You're probably controlling an entire city, or you're controlling an entire waterworks. So really the whole system is distributed. So this diagram is rather limited in its scope. So what are the challenges? The challenges are, clearly the difficulty is in this part. At least that's one difficulty that I'm concerned about in my research. There are many other difficulties. That in the 80s when you had this CPS over the CAN bus, the good thing was that you had a very high performance network. Okay? But now you have a very resource challenged network. How do you first of all think about that? How do you design that so that you get something out of it, some quality? How do you design it? How do you think about it? So whatever you have to deal with, how do you use the components to make a good network? Once you've designed that network, you're then left with certain performance issues. You have loss, you have delay. Then you have a rate limitation between the two sides. You have a packet delay and loss. And you have loss of time synchrony. You can't assume, as you could do in the 70s Bosch CPS, the timing is well respected across the whole system. There's only one computer, everything is attached to that. Timing is very simple to do in that case. But here you have problem of synchrony. You have things all over the place. Yes?
Well, is there another dimension which is the extent to which an application is mission critical? So if you think of an autopilot flying a plane, or for example cars, there things are mission critical, therefore you will invest in a good network. Whereas when you talk about these poor networks, the application may be very tolerant of delays and loss and so on, like monitoring the feature. So Is that another dimension to consider?
Yeah. So that's of course true. There are, but the question is that if you are trying to manage the gas leaks in an apartment, how mission critical is that? And if you are trying to use those sensors in the wheel to help the driver drive well over icy roads, how mission critical is that? So really, some of the issues are common, and some of the issues, if you're only worrying about lighting in a room, maybe it's not so mission critical. If it's non-uniform, it's not so important. Okay, this is true for even ordinary communication. People are using the internet for mission critical applications, for running nuclear reactors, for defense.
I guess the point is that when you get to these wireless networks and and so on,
Yeah.
maybe many of the applications also can tolerate.
Well, I think you have to probably, I think so. That's a good point. I'll mention that is not the area that I work in. How do you run mission critical applications on such resource challenge networks is an issue. How do you make them provably correct? How do you make them secure? Even though you have this sort of challenge. That could be that's a challenge, that's a research challenge. That's a research challenge. Okay? But yes, it is true that I guess in the early deployment, you will not be using these sort of technologies for very mission critical applications. That sensor I mentioned to you earlier, 2012 was when it was first brought in. They've yet not been able to make it available in the full glory that I described out there, because it's a real challenge to do what they want to do with that. Okay, so let's talk about IoT networks. Let's talk about the limitations first. So here is, you all saw this yesterday. Here is what a fragment of the IoT network would look like. You have, say this is the base station connecting the IoT part to the whole thing is IoT, the wireless part to the infrastructure. And you have the usual protocol stack inside this, Ethernet on one side. Other side, I'm going to be using the example throughout of what is called ZigBee. This is 15.4, 2.4 gigahertz. Google has adopted this stack in its thread stack. There are two or three consortia which are emerging. This is the Google thread stack, which has this protocol in it called ZigBee. Okay, so on this side is the ZigBee stack. On this side is the Ethernet stack. And you can see that packets will go up to IPv6. IPv6 is what is going to be used here. 6LoWPAN is the interface between IPv6 and the PHY and the MAC. Then packets come here, go up. The application is running between the IoT devices and the other side. Okay, and typically you'll have UDP. And another thing about resource challenge networks is that TCP is very hard to run on these networks. Okay, now let's look at some of the first limitations. This is a measurement that we made between pairs of devices, pairs of modes. The most popular devices for ZigBee are these TI chipsets, 2420 and 2520. 2520 is a more advanced version. What we've done is we have plotted here the packet error rate versus the received signal strength. Okay, first of all, look at the numbers here, -80 to -95 dBm. If any of you have a Wi-Fi monitor on your cell phone, look at the numbers you get there. You get -50 dBm, -65 dBm. So there are about 20 or 30 dB, 1,000 times more power is used in Wi-Fi than here. So it's a very low, that's why they're called low power networks. Then look at the values here for the error probabilities. If the received signal strength is around -88 dBm or better, your error probabilities are about 1%. Okay, and then there is a threshold here, and suddenly it goes up, and the error probability become 10% or worse. Okay, so you can think of this as a sweet spot at which you want to operate. If you want to drive your error probabilities even lower, you require even higher powers, and higher powers, of course, mean that you have shorter links. Let's examine what the link lengths are out here. If you look at the IoT, this chip's spec sheet, you will look at numbers like 100 meters or more. What you get actually in practice is 10 meters to 30 meters. So in a building like this, in a building like mine, which is made of granite from the 1940s, you get 10-meter links which are reliable, and 30 meters links outdoor in our lawn, in the EC department, or in a power distribution yard, which we made some measurements. The newer devices, this is already about 5-6 years old. -98 dBm is at which they operate. This is very, very small power. You can also use a higher source power, 5 dBm, whereas this works at 0 dBm, and you're able to get 100-meter links outdoors. Okay, so you're looking at links of this size, getting about 1% error probability. Now compare that with the kind of error probabilities you get in optical fiber, or even on a high quality microwave link, which is order of magnitude better. Okay, so you're dealing with low power lossy networks and short range links, particularly in this technology. Today you're going to sub gigahertz, less than 1 gigahertz, 400 megahertz to get longer links. But be careful there, they'll say 1 kilometer, you will only get 200, 300 meters. Okay, so if you want to go from anywhere to anywhere, say in this ISC campus, you have to perhaps use multi-hop. So multi-hopping is essential. Imagine putting this in a basement, right? You want to monitor the level of some gas in the basement, and you want to bring up the network outside. You cannot expect to get one hop communication all the way out. So these are the issues in terms of the error probabilities, in terms of the power, in terms of the link ranges. Now, this is the phi. I just told you about the physical layer. Well, as you know, in wireless, you have to have a MAC layer, which arranges how the medium is shared. I won't go into all the details out here. This is only to give you an idea that if you take the ZigBee MAC, which is CSMA-CA, here is a little network fragment. Okay, here's the base station. Here are some devices, multi-hop from 2 to BS through the relay 1 and so on and so forth. The dashed lines show the interference between the nodes. Okay, so node 2 can see 1, node 10 can see 9, node 2 cannot see node 10. Suppose you analyze all of this. I'll tell you how to analyze. Yeah, sure.
CA is collision avoidance.
Collision avoidance, yeah. That's what you normally have in Wi-Fi and CSMA. Okay, collision detection is on wire. So I'll tell you how to analyze this in a few minutes, in a slide a little later, but we analyze that. And we are plotting here the probability of delivery, say from node 1 to the base station, or from node 9 to the base station, as a function of the rate at which packets are entering the nodes. Okay, why is that important? That number is a measurement rate. Suppose all you're doing is sending measurements from the sensors to the base station at some rate. Okay, so that's what lambda is. Lambda is the x-axis, the measurement rate. Suppose that the measurements are coming in. At what rate can measurements be done in the nodes so as to get just 1 second, some throughput from it? You will notice that the delivery probability is 1, just around 0. And you get to about 1 packet per second, and delivery probability drops to about 90% or 80%. So again, lossy networks. So it is low power, low throughput, lossy networks. Okay, so yeah, you had a question there.
So does this use binary exponential backoff?
It uses, binary exponential is a textbook concept. The backoff that is there is exponential. It doubles in each time there's a collision, and then it stops after some k attempts. So it is exponential in that sense. It doubles. On the average, it doubles.
On average?
Yes. So the expected backoff time is multiplied by a factor of 2 after a collision. But the actual backoff is random between 0 and some maximum value. That maximum value is what's doubling. So the mean is doubling. Okay, it's uniform over that 0 to maximum value. Okay, so you cannot drive these things very high. You get low throughput in terms of packets per second as well. So you cannot expect to make measurements rapidly in your sensors. Okay, so I've given you some idea about the limitations of these IoT devices, particularly the ZigBee context. Okay. Let's see how you design the network. Suppose somebody tells you work in a company, your boss tells you, give me a network which connects this to this, and it should get this quality of service. How do you do that? So here's the problem. Here's the problem that you'll be faced with. This problem is basically for a static IoT network. Nothing is mobile out here. So suppose you are connecting up, say, gas sensors in an apartment to a base station on the floor. Whatever the application, you're connecting up sensors in a large farm to a base station at the corner of the farm. So these devices here, shown here, are sensors. The application will tell you where to put the sensors. If you want to put gas sensors in an apartment, you'll put them in the kitchen. So essentially, these sensor locations are given to us because of the application. Here's the base station. This will be determined based on availability of power, based upon availability of Ethernet nearby. And you won't have too many of these. Then the customer that you're doing this work for tells you, you can place relays in between at the axis. This is what a constraint is given to you. This is a a natural requirement. I can't put a sensor, a relay here because somebody will walk over it. I can perhaps put a relay on that box out there, or maybe on the top of this the camera, the projector there. So the customer that I'm doing the design for tells me where I can place relays. Okay, so where among the X marks should the relays be placed, so as to achieve some delivery guarantees from the sensors. For example, this is one QoS that we work with. The probability that the packet delivery delay is more than 200 milliseconds. I mean, this could be a number which your application tells you. I'm just giving an example. So packet delivery delay is more than 200 milliseconds is less than 0.01. So only 1% of the packets arrive at the destination from the sensor to the base station in more than 200 milliseconds. If it arrives later than that, then the packet is considered to be lost. Okay. So the problem is this: I want to choose amongst these X marks a few locations, say these 8 locations, and I want to make them few because each of the locations is going to cost, so that I have, and I also want to give a path so that there's a path from the sensor to the base station to achieve some quality of service. How is that done? So let's look at, first of all, how do you do this for very light traffic? Very light traffic. And what we do is we convert this quality of service objective into a hop count bound. It says that you should not have more than 3 hops between any sensor and the base station. How is that done? I won't spend time on that, but basically I'll skip to, yeah. Now, I'll come back to this in a second. Many applications of IoT require very light traffic. Imagine metering. If you're just metering in a house, water metering or electricity metering, maybe you require only 1 measurement per month, or even if in the future 1 measurement per day, or 1 measurement per hour, even that's a lot. Even 1 measurement in 10 seconds is a lot. It's slow, it's very slow because of the parameters here. So very light traffic. You're not looking at video here. You're not looking at anything else here. You're looking only at an occasional measurement. So metering, environment monitoring are applications of that sort. Formally, in terms of the mathematics, this is what we call the lone packet model. What a lone packet model says is, when a packet enters a network, it's able to traverse the entire path with no other packet interfering with it. Okay? So that's what we call the lone packet model in our analysis. So once you do that, that means that a packet starting from here along some path will reach the base station with nothing bothering it. Only what bothers it? It is the poor link qualities. Okay? You can have link outage. I've not talked about this, but links fade. Okay? They can fade pretty badly. That's the usual fading that you read about in wireless literature. Links can fade. So if a link fades, the packet is gone because the links fade for a long time. Even if the link doesn't fade, as somebody said, if there's an error, you back off and retry. And after 3 retries or 4 retries, the system gives up. So you can have a packet drop because of multiple retries failing. Okay? Remember that when the link is good, you're getting 1% error probability. Okay? So you can have a probability of loss even if you have 3 retries. Okay? Even if the packet gets through, even if the links are not fading, even if the packet gets through, all the backoffs accumulate over time, and you will have delay between the source and the sink. You can exceed your Dmax bounds. Okay, so a packet may not reach the destination in time because of multiple reasons: outage, multiple retries and drop, and Dmax. Okay, so you can analyze that, and what you ultimately come up to is that if you have a hop count which is less than 5, say, or 3, whatever is your objective, that's enough to ensure that, provided you ensure the links are of a certain quality. And here comes the rub. How do I get the 10 meters earlier? 10 meters is what gives me, with a high probability, a good link quality in this building. 30 meters may give me a good link quality outside. Quality in what sense? In the sense of the link not falling below minus 88 dBm with a high probability. Okay, so so basically, ultimately, what you get is a hop constrained Steiner tree problem with a minimum number of Steiner nodes objective. So you want to ensure that you pick a few Steiner points which are picked from your X marks, and so that the hop count between every sensor in the base station is bounded by 5 sales. Okay, so here actually is an implementation of our design technique in the building I work in. This is my own cabin and my own room, and here are, say, the red stars are the sensors. Here's the base station. The black dots are where I was told you can place the relays. An algorithm that we ran told us to place relays at these blue triangles, And ultimately it turned out you require only a few of them to find paths between the stars and the base station. Okay? Now you'll ask me, how come your algorithm is making a mistake of giving you some other locations where you don't require? Well, the algorithm is iterative, the links are random, so that kind of error will be made, but you should not view it as an error. I won't spend time on this. One of the things that you have to worry about in designing IoT networks is robustness over time. The link qualities you see today will not be there tomorrow. Why is that? If you say are deploying, say, links in a forest, you deploy during the monsoon season, all the leaves are there. You deploy, and then it becomes dry and the leaves are shed. Something else happens, the propagation changes. In a building, there are weekends and weekdays. During weekdays, the doors are open, people are moving around. During weekend, doors are all closed, fans are off. It's very different. So if you deploy during one season or one time, how do you ensure it works? So you have to put relays, extra relays out there, which will become operational when the environment is different. So having extra relays is very important. Okay. So now one question that will come to your mind is the Steiner tree algorithm requires you to know the graph. You don't know the graph. What do you do? There are links out there. You put a node here, a node there. There's a link in between. So what you do is you do a model field iteration. Okay, you come up with a model for links that, and the model we came up with is with a very high probability some links of length 20 meters are good. Then you assume a geometric graph with 20 meters as your link length, deploy using that, make measurements in the field and go and correct it. So there is a sort of iterative field iteration that we do, and this is published a couple of years back in that. Okay, now I spoke about very light traffic earlier, where packets are coming in a trickle. How do you now go to a bit more? I want to get a bit more, right? How do I get some more throughput? Look at these two plots, these two graphs. Both of them are designs, are network designs. Okay. Suppose my hop constraint is, I guess it was 5 in this, I didn't note it down, 5. On this design, from S1 you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops to the base station. It is the farthest away. So this design works for very light traffic. This design I have put two, by the way, the S's are sensors and the R's are relays. This design I have put 2 relays. There's no relays here. This is only using sensors to navigate the packets. I have put two relays here. Even here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in both designs, the hop count bound is met. That means both designs will give you performance that you require at very light traffic. And traffic is coming in trickle. Which of these designs will carry more traffic? You can push the lambdas more. Okay. So both provide QoS for the lone packet model. Those of you who are familiar with queuing theory, you know, if you draw the MG1 mean queuing delay, as you let lambda go to 0, what you get is what we are really ensuring here in the lone packet model. What happens? How does delay go up as you make your lambda larger? How do you analyze that? How do you think about that? Okay, which one of them will carry more traffic? This is actually a very hard problem, and we handled it like this. What we did was, we will now try to get a mathematical model for a multi-hop ZigBee network. And this is a talk by itself. Here is a multi-hop ZigBee network. These little green things are the moats. There's a tree and there's a base station. How do you analyze this? How do you determine that if there are lambdas coming in all the moats, how do you obtain the probability of delivery? The way you do that is, around 2000, one Bianchi, a researcher from Italy, came up with a mathematical model for analyzing the Wi-Fi mechanism. Okay, and that has given rise to this whole area of fixed point based analyses for CSMA networks. So we basically have leveraged that in many ways. We've gone far beyond what Bianchi has done. So essentially what you do is you take each moat, take each device, pull it out of the network, and model the environment by average values. For example, what is the fraction of time that moat is active? Let's call that alpha I. Okay, alpha I prime, alpha, and so on and so forth. And here I want to analyze myself. Assume those values. Given those values, I analyze my random process, and then we close the loop. Okay, that's basically the idea. It gives rise to certain fixed point equations, which look messy, but each equation is really simple in itself. If you look at these equations, somehow, somewhere in this equation is a topology. Okay, that what is the effect of the topology I have chosen? Right? I told you how do I compare this topology and this topology. Okay. Now, when I have a bunch of equations, somewhere in this are the topology, and trying to extract from this a design rule is not easy. So what do? We then use some analysis. Okay, we say let's look at the fixed point, which is going to be the operating point. And first of all, we verify that the fixed point is good. If you recall, I showed you plots earlier of throughput versus lambda. They match very well with simulation. So we say we believe the fixed point is the actual performance. And then we analyze these equations around the fixed point. We say, okay, I'm going to now analyze sort of analytically into the mathematical analysis the fixed point around that, and then extract from that the effect of topology. So it's published here. You can take a look at it. This is the analysis, and I'll tell you where this other thing is done. Okay, so here's what we get. Let lambda be the packet rate on each sensor. So now you want to see which of these two designs will be able to push the lambda larger. By the way, there are two cases, the hidden node case and the no hidden node case. The no hidden node case is all nodes can see every other node, so it's a small network. The hidden node case is because the node here which cannot see a node very far away. That's a harder problem. Extracting topology rules for that is harder. So we have a solution for that which I won't talk about here. So this is the case where it's a small network, say this room, or maybe this floor. Turns out you can derive from the fixed point equations a very simple rule. It says that so long as lambda satisfies this, you can carry it with the quality of service you require. Embedded in the number b, which is explicit in our paper, is the QoS objective. Okay, so the QoS objective is something, probability of delivery is 10%, 1%, whatever, that b has that number in it. So what does it say? It says that the measurement rate that you are having in the sensors multiplied by the sum of the hop count from the sensors to the base station is bounded by a number b, which we can compute explicitly. So what does it say? If you want to push lambda large, make the summation hi small, right? If you calculate the summation hi for this, well, h1 is 4 here, h2 is 3 here, and so on. Add them all up, okay, and do it here. You'll find that the summation hi is more here. Just a second. Summation hi is more here, which means that you will be able to carry less throughput here than in that. What does it say? Look for the shortest path tree, right? And it turns out that you require relays to be able to get the shortest path tree. Okay, so if you want to save relays, you pay by a little bit of throughput here. If you want to put relays in, then you can get the summation hi down and thereby get more throughput. Yeah, question. Processing time is negligible. Yeah, that's the assumption out here. Okay, it's a good question. So you can simply add processing time everywhere, subtract it from your QoS, and then let the rest of it be the QoS. Okay, so it's a good point. The processing time is there. It can be milliseconds. You have to add it all up along the path and subtract it. Yeah.
So the packet rate is not a function of the sensor?
Okay, so in our paper we have it there. I'm giving you the simple version of that. Really what you have to have is that you have to have summation lambda k hk is less than or equal to b. That's what you have to do, but look at the paper. This is the simplest version of that. Okay. So, and a simple argument can help you also justify this, because if you look at it, in a no hidden node network, the total packet rate on the medium is lambda summation hi, because every packet has to only travel alone. You cannot have simultaneous packet transmission. Yes, question. No, this is CSMA. No, nothing centralized. Oh, the path has been designed earlier. Okay, you designed the paths earlier, and the paths are now programmed into the edges. So there is actually more to this. I'm running out of time. There's more to this. Really the routing protocol is not static. It's RPL. What you're really doing is you're giving RPL some good paths to work with. Okay, that's what you're doing. But yeah, here the routing is static. Okay, so this has appeared in that paper. Okay. I'll skip this because one interesting thing that you sometimes have to do is to lay down IoT networks on the fly. Okay, this is very important for first responders in buildings. Kumbh Mela, you want to put up a a IoT network for the Kumbh Mela, and the Mela keeps moving around, so every day you have to have a new IoT network. So how do you go about deploying IoT networks so that you can deploy them quickly and they'll work? So this I'll skip. It's essentially a control problem. It's the control problem of controlling placement as you go. Okay. In fact, we have done this experiment in our own campus, and it works quite well. It's going to appear in these two transactions in a couple of years. Okay. You asked about centralized. So in the Internet 4.0 framework, where they want to do tight control of timing between the sensors, actuators, and the controllers, because that's what's important for industrial control, CSMA is not viewed as being very useful. So you actually want to do TDMA. So essentially what you do is you introduce between the physical layer and the 6-low-pan layer 2 layers. One is called the .4E. E is this so-called time synchronized MAC, TDM MAC, and 6-top is the one that manages it. It actually assigns slots to links, right? But the vision out there is that you have a centralized control. Somebody out there tells, okay, you go in this slot and you link go in this slot. So here is the essential framework. There are frames, there are frequencies. So for example, this frame and frequency is assigned to the link A to D. And this frame and frequency is assigned, or the slot and frequency is assigned to the link A to C. Okay? And this is all done in a centralized fashion.
TDMA works on the large scale also. I mean, because of scale for IoT, I mean, doing time division is like what?
That's also my question, but I think somebody else can answer that. So really, CSMA is much more scalable. Scalable in terms of its manageability, not so much in terms of its capacity. There's a trade-off out there. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, suppose that somebody is interested in, by the way, I believe that these networks will only be one-hop networks. Doing multi-hopping with TDMA is going to be a nightmare. And it'll only be, say, there is a robot and there is a controller. The thing that really fails is the wire harness from the controller to the robot's fingers. Suppose you only want to replace those with wireless, one-hop wireless. That is probably where this might come in. Okay. Multi-hopping over TDMA I don't think is going to be very practical. So again, because lack of time, I want to get to the next topic. We have actually worked out a distributed TDMA algorithm, which is mean delay optimal. Okay, that is the question that you asked. How do you do distributed over time division? So essentially, what we are saying is, if you can snoop information on the wireless, which tells you something about other nodes' activities. So if the reverse channel is good, can I now do a optimal algorithm? This was done based upon some Markov decision theory, and it turns out that this is lambda and this is the mean delay. Optimal is this black line, which is the essential centralized GOD1Q. Our algorithm is the one almost there, and it's able to do it in a distributed fashion. Okay. So let me get to this now, because that is what CPS is about. I only have 5 minutes to talk about this. So here is the problem. I'm bringing it back. You have the sensors and actuators, you have the inference and control, you have the network, and these are the problems that we are dealing with. Let's look at, so all of you who work in networks know about cross-layer issues. If you run TCP over wireless, you have to somehow be worried about what's below. Okay, so I cannot simply ignore wireless if I'm running TCP over wireless. I have to do something in TCP perhaps to make it wireless insensitive. In a similar manner, if you're running control and inference over a network which has delays and so on and so forth, then how do you, one requires some cross-layer understanding. Let's take a simple example. Suppose you have this region where you want to put sensors, and from the sensors there's data coming to the fusion center, and that fusion center has to make some inference about that data. Okay. Suppose that until now you were operating with wires. So there were wires connecting the sensor. This could be say an air conditioning system in a hotel. This could be a gas sensor system in an apartment. There are wires running from every sensor to the fusion center, and the fusion center is trying to determine whether there is a gas leak or something. Now we're going to make a simplification in this model. We're going to assume that whatever happens in the entire region, the small region. So this room has a gas leak, and the sensors are all here. So here's the model. Until some random time t, there was no gas leak. At other random time t, a gas leak occurs. So there's a change of distribution. The random process from time 0 to random time t was no gas leak. At t, gas leak occurred, and then from there onwards, there is gas leak. Okay, there's a change in distribution. I want to know when T has occurred as early as possible. Okay. So as usual in hypothesis testing, there are two opposing things. There is a false alarm and detection. Okay. In these systems, there are two opposing objectives: false alarm and delay in detection. If you're very cautious in declaring that there is a gas leak, you can have low false alarm probabilities. If you're very anxious about it, you could have high false alarm and small delay. So that's the very old 1950s kind of a theory. But here's what happens when you have a network. You have the sensors. You've now cut the wires. The wires have been cut with the scissors, and you put a wireless in between. So now you have sensors which are sending data over a random access network. And then there is, in this Fusion Center, I have to introduce another box now. I have to introduce a sequencer. Because what used to happen, before you before you put a wireless in, this is all wireline. You essentially attach the sensors to the controller. Every time there was a clock tick, you get measurements from all of them. You can process the data synchronously. Okay, every time there's a clock tick, I get measurements from all the sensors, temperature measurement or gas level measurements. But now what's happening is these sensors are fighting for bandwidth. Some sensor could be behind, some could be ahead. So you have to sequence them now. You have to do sequencing in the sensor. That's where timing comes in. So now this sequencer can be designed in two different ways. Either it ensures that only when a batch of sensors is accumulated, it passes that on to the decision maker, right? So if there are two sensors fighting for the medium, one sensor gets a packet in first, it waits there. Next sensor gets the packet in next. Now the batch is complete, it forwards it to the to the decision maker. So if you do that, the decision maker does not have to change. I can have the same decision maker which was there before the wires were cut, right? But there's another alternative. I don't want to waste time. So when a measurement comes, I pass it on to the decision maker. So this is what we often call optimistic processing, right? Pass on decision maker. Now what's going to happen? The decision maker will get data from the same time tick in a trickle. It'll come, then one more will come, one more will come. We have two different processing mechanisms. One is the decision maker does not change. You forward data synchronously. The other one is decision maker has to change now. The data is given to it as it arrives. So I talked about this. Now the question that we are asking is the following. There's a very interesting trade-off out here. If you sample your sensors rapidly, you have a network which is going to get congested. This is a ZigBee network, right? And so you will have, remember from queuing theory, as you increase traffic, you have more delay, also more delay variability. The real power of learning queuing theory is not that you can apply directly, that you will learn these principles. So there's also more variability, right? So as you push your sampling rate, but then as you push sampling rate, you get more information also. So lower sampling rate will mean that you have information delay. Higher sampling rate will mean you have congestion delay. Okay? Can we find an optimal sampling rate? So fast implies wireless congestion, slow implies measurement delay. And here is, okay, so first of all you have to design the optimal detection rule now. What Shirayev did in 50s has to be evolved further in this environment, in this setting. So we have done that. So the red line here is network oblivious decision making. The black line there is network aware decision making. You can see there's some advantage. First of all, this is the plot of the mean detection delay, time until you detect the gas leak versus the samples per slot. If you ignore the network, you get slightly higher delay, otherwise you get slightly lower delay. Okay? Now you can decide whether you want to put in the extra programming effort to leverage this 20 slots of delay, or ignore it and say this is fine for me, I can live with that higher delay. So anyway, what this is saying is a classical detection problem solved in the 1950s has to be resolved today because of this issue that between the sensing and the inference there is a random delay. Okay. One more thing, and then I'll probably have to close now. Energy management is very important. Okay, so sensors, as you heard earlier, was energy challenged. The batteries, you don't want to keep them on for too long. Can I now do this problem by having a control channel back to the sensors, telling them, stay off right now, I don't need you, and turn them on later. So now I have two different things to do. I am inference and control. I have to decide when there's a gas leak while controlling the energy of the sensors. Okay, this is another interesting problem that one can deal with. So here at every time tick, I have a random number of I have a controlled number of sensors which are operating. MK is say 100 sensors, out of them only 10 are operating. Then make a decision, stop or continue. Stop meaning that I declare there is a change, or continue. If I continue, I say how many should turn on now, and so on and so forth. What is the optimal way of doing that? Because you see what will happen is when you begin to observe a change, you will suddenly say, okay, turn on, and give me the data. When you're in the quiescent mode, when there's nothing happening, keep the sensors mostly off. So this can be analyzed. Essentially, you work with the same statistic as was done earlier. Posterior probability. There's a threshold which decides whether you want to stop. Otherwise, if you don't stop, there's a threshold to decide how many sensors to turn on. If pi k is between 0.4 and 0, turn one sensor on. Pi k is larger. Pi is the probability, is your belief into as whether the event has occurred or not. Okay. So as your belief that the event has occurred increases, you turn more sensors on. Okay. So this has been published in Infocom. And recently there has been work done from Illinois which has taken this work much further. Okay, last thing here, take 2 minutes more. Control. Now this is not something I work in. A very nice survey is there from Professor P.R. Kumar and his student from 2012. Here's the problem. Suppose you have a plant, a linear quadratic plant. Okay, so you have xk plus 1 is stated time k plus 1 is axk plus b control plus noise. The sensing is an observation is the linear multiple of the state, so the usual LQG system. Now when the sensor data is sent over the network, there's loss. So the gamma k indicates whether the packet is lost or not. Gamma k is 0 or 1. E gamma is the expected packet loss, say 10%, 20%. When the controller sends back the control signal to the control plant, there's again a possibility of loss. So the control applied is nu k times nu ck. Nu ck is the actual control computed. Nu k is 0 or 1, loss or no loss, right? So if there's no loss, then the control signal comes. If there's loss, control signal is not there. So E nu is the probability of loss. Sorry, probability of delivery. E gamma is probability of delivery. E nu is probability of delivery. So E gamma is the probability of sensor data reaching here. E nu is the probability of the control reaching there. If the channel is error free, control and sensing is error free, then you have the well known separation of estimation and control. You run a Kalman filter, estimate the state, apply linear control, and you're done. Okay? But if there's a positive probability of error, the separation of control and estimation fails. Okay? Unless there's acknowledgement. So if you can acknowledge the data, then separation continues to work. So you require TCP, but TCP can't be run on this. So essentially, if you can run TCP, you're in good shape. If you cannot run TCP or some kind of an ACK process, then there's trouble here. And then it also turns out, this is all shown in papers referred to there, that if the error probability is too high, you can't stabilize the system. So there is also a curve which says that only if error probability is low enough will the system be stabilized. So okay, you have to also worry about in-network computing. My entire discussion has been as if data comes from the IoT nodes to the base station, you process it there. Not very efficient, because you're carrying so much data unnecessarily. One has to work on processing in the sensor. We've done some work on that. My colleague has done work on that. You can actually run SVMs inside that. They have to be integer calculations, low footprint. Security can be done on that. Then collaborative processing. Don't just process the data in a node, do collaboratively on the network. Okay, so that's also required. Clock synchronization, function computation, optimization, signal processing, tracking are all problems you can solve in an in-network distributed fashion. Need low storage, low energy, simple algorithms. And finally, you have to worry about, computer scientists are familiar with time complexity, but also worry about energy complexity. So algorithms have to be energy efficient and time efficient. Okay? And we have some work on that which came out some years back, and there's more work that's come out in that subsequently. Okay, so other challenges are probably are known to many of you here from the industry. You have a very large system comprising resource challenge embedded components. How do you build provably correct and reliable systems? I understand there's a group in Microsoft Redmond working on this. How do you manage such large distributed systems? Security and anonymity. And when TCP/IP came, the real big evolution was you had a Linux platform to run everything on. Is there going to be a Linux platform for IoT? There are lots of different platforms now, Contiki, TinyOS, and so on and so forth. We need one which will be stable and supported. Okay, final remarks. So CPS emerged in the 1970s. Essentially what it is embedded computing and control. It's very well known to us, nothing really new. The term was coined in 2006. I do not know who coined it. NSF began to put out calls for proposals around that time. IoT has origins in ad hoc networks from the 1970s. Really, it is essentially only that. Then DARPA funded a project on sensor networking in, I think, UC Berkeley and UCLA, which gave rise to the area of WSN. And I think you can trace back the origin of IoT today to those projects. Now, one thing I can tell you from my own experience, we were involved in setting up a nationwide packet network for email, browsing, and so on in the late 80s. At that time, technology had already been around for about 20 years. 70s was when ClientRock and Windsurf and all did the experiments in MIT and other places. Already had about 20 years since that happened. This was a time in the late 80s when we were still worrying about whether we should deploy an OSI network. Do you know what OSI is? You don't know what OSI is. OSI network or a TCP/IP network. And actually we were deciding between X500 or SMTP, token-based LANs or CSMA or TDM LANs, and it was a big mess. The same mess is what we have today in the area of IoT. It's important not to get scared of the mess, but to dive into it. This is what we did in those years, in that era. And I think it has to be dived into by large entities like perhaps Microsoft and ISC and the big universities in the country. Startups cannot, they can do little bits of it, but you need a consortium approach to this. Okay. So plethora of standards was there, a lot of excitement and uncertain business prospects. This really was the case in 88, 89. With the internet also, nobody knew. I used to be sniggered at, what are you doing, internet? What is this internet? Okay. Email, what's email? So people used to actually snigger at you, what are you doing? Okay. I think today if you talk about IoT, people may say, what are you doing? What are you tinkering with? Okay. But really it's a very big thing out there. And one has to, there's a risk in getting into the area because you never know what may happen to it. It may just die 5 years from now and you spend 5 years of your life on this. So that's a good time to be in, rather than things have already been sorted out and you just go and take the pickings. It's time for a large experimental testbed research and participation in standardization process, which we are not doing. And in India, I think that, with my experience with ERNet, at least I feel that way, we need to have a nationally funded collaborative mission for testbed experience with CPS and IoT. Because unless we do that, we'll never learn the technology, we'll never contribute to it. Okay, so thank you very much. Some acknowledgements of people who funded my research.
Any more questions? Any more questions for Professor Aruna Kumar?
Especially in the multi-hop networks, few of them must be just forwarding nodes. They don't even sense it.
Yeah.
So, is there some specific ways of controlling the sleep cycles of that? Because unexpectedly, any time they will be required to forward packets. So, do we have some specific methods where we can think of minimizing the power?
Well, we have not worked on that. I guess the example I gave you of this controlling the sensors while doing inference was an example of that. But if you have a multi-hop network, designing schedules for keeping nodes off and on depending upon the availability of traffic to forward is a problem that's been looked at many times in the literature. Okay? There are two ways of doing it. One way of doing it is to have a synchronous schedule right? You know data is going to come at these clock ticks, so ensure that nodes get awake at the clock tick, the path is made ready. The other technology which is just emerging now practically is called wake-on radios. That is, the nodes are they're not totally sleeping. They have a radio which is operating at a very low power, say microamperes, and when some node wants to forward a packet, it can kick the node next to it by means of a small RF pulse. The node wakes up and you can forward the packet. So that's two ways in which people have tried to address the problem of sleeping nodes.
When it started ERNet, there was this rallying thing of connect all the research institutions around which you can work, irrespective of people sniggering at you. But, and by the way, benefited by it because when I moved as a faculty, I could at least get email in my office or here when I walked across. Similarly, for the government to fund the proposal that you talked about, is there a rallying project that you could put forth and say, here is this project for which we did this?
Let's think about it. I mean, for example, we're talking about smart cities a lot nowadays, so that could be a rallying project. I mean, smart cities, who will do it? You know, who has the understanding of building a smart city? Today, I think when people are building smart cities, all they're doing is they're improving the pavements and making the canals look better. I don't think it's really smart in the sense of what we think is smart. That's going to happen in pockets perhaps, but who will think of the entire architecture for a national smart city project? I don't know. It's not for me to think about anymore, it's for younger people to do it. Okay.
Okay, if there are no more questions, can I ask Venkat to acknowledge Professor Anand Kumar with a small token of appreciation, please?
We did cut out the lamp lighting and all that, but we didn't.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.